China tried to fix the rain problem. They started this huge national project to turn their massive new cities into sponges. The idea was to make 80% of urban areas able to soak up and reuse 70% of all the rain that fell. It was the boldest urban water plan ever attempted. And then it just poured. In the summer of 2023, the heaviest rain in 140 years hit around the capital. It was so much rain, it felt like something out of a sci-fi movie. The sponge didn't just get wet, it drowned. Now, hydrologists and city planners are quietly asking something in flooded streets across the whole country. What happens when your defense against the storm actually makes the flood worse? Tell me in the comments what you think is a bigger threat to a modern city, the storm itself, or when the systems meant to protect it fail. You might change your mind by the end of this. This isn't about some future risk. It's a crisis happening right now. It's about a national strategy being pushed to its breaking point, and in some places it's already broken. When the world sees satellite images of submerged cities, of economic hubs shut down, they just see a natural disaster. But it's way more complicated than that. The real question isn't if China can hold back the water, it's about the price they're paying for how they're trying to do it. To get why China is drowning right now, you need to understand it's not one disaster, but two. It's like a story of two floods, north and south, happening right after each other, but each caused by different things. They show a countrywide weakness that no single project, no matter how big, seems able to fix. First, the north. In late July 2023, what was left of Typhoon Doksuri moved inland. It had lost its hurricane shape, but none of its power. It just sat over northern China, right over the superpopulated area around Beijing, and it started to rain. But this wasn't just rain. It was a deluge. A weather station in Changping, a district of the capital, recorded a shocking 744.8 millimeters. That's over 29 inches of rain in about 83 hours. To give you some perspective, that's more rain than London usually gets in an entire year. It was the worst rain event to hit that region in 140 years, since they started keeping records in 1891. The infrastructure of a modern global superpower was up against weather from a forgotten era. The result was a total catastrophe. Rivers in the Haihei Basin, the huge water system that drains this whole northern plain, turned into raging monsters. Beijing itself, this concrete fortress of power, mostly dodged the worst of the flooding. Its advanced drainage and its top priority status protected it. But the water had to go somewhere. That's just how physics works, and no government can change that. So the water went to Hebei province. This area, with over 74 million people, sits like a bowl around the capital. Here, it stopped being an act of God and became about what people did. And then there's the south. Less than a year later, in April 2024, the whole thing happened again, but differently. No typhoon this time. This was about the big rivers themselves. In Guangdong province, the economic powerhouse of the country, home to 127 million people and responsible for a tenth of China's entire GDP, the Pearl River Delta started to swell. Constant spring rains had soaked the ground for weeks. It couldn't take any more water. The Beijiang River, a major branch, surged to levels that state media described with a chilling phrase, a once-in-a-century flood. 24 different water stations across the province hit record-breaking levels for April. Over 110,000 people had to leave their homes in cities like Qingyuan as the water just kept rising, turning streets into canals. These two events, the northern flood and the southern surge, paint a really scary picture. This isn't just a local problem. It's not just hitting rural areas or farms. The floods are now hitting the political heart of the country and its industrial, economic centers, the very places that represent China's modern power and wealth. The fight isn't in some far-off place anymore. It's at the capital's doorstep and inside the most crucial factories that power the global supply chain. And it showed some really tough decisions the government makes. It's a strategy that's both terrifyingly logical and incredibly sad, a strategy of sacrifice zones. So many people watch these events on the news and only really see the water. But to actually understand what happened in Hebei in 2023, you have to look past the rain and see the decision. You need to know about the Zhuzhihongku. These are the flood storage and detention areas. There are 98 of them across China. They're low-lying spots, often a mix of farmland, villages, and even whole cities, that are officially set aside to be deliberately flooded. They're like emergency pressure valves, meant to get covered in water to ease the pressure on major rivers and protect important cities, key infrastructure, and high-priority political projects. The Haihei River Basin, which threatened Beijing, has 6 of these zones. In August 2023, the government chose to open the floodgates. The city of Zhuozhou, with over 600,000 people, became one of these zones. It was sacrificed. to save Beijing from the flood, and just as important, to protect the Xiong'an area, a futuristic dream city personally pushed by Xi Jinping, a shining symbol of his vision for China's future, being built from scratch 60 miles from the capital. To save this jewel of the future, a city of the present had to go underwater. The authorities rerouted the floodwaters from the Baigu River, directing the torrent right into the populated areas of Zhuozhou. Residents tell a story not of a natural disaster, but of a sudden, shocking betrayal. Social media was full of desperate pleas. Accounts from residents, later reported by international news, talked about a terrifying realization. The water didn't just slowly rise, it came in like a tide. They didn't tell us to evacuate, one resident wrote. The water rose when we were sleeping. The speed of the water rising was too fast. It was man-made flooding. Whole parts of the city disappeared under a brown, churning sea. Over 134,000 people in the city were affected. More than 1.5 million were displaced across the wider Hebei province. The direct economic losses were tallied at over 95 billion yuan, which is more than 13 billion US dollars. But a number that big doesn't really capture what it's like for a family to watch a lifetime of work disappear in a few hours. And then there's the story of the books, a cultural tragedy hidden inside the bigger catastrophe. Zhuozhou wasn't just a residential city, it was one of the biggest logistics and warehousing hubs for China's entire publishing industry. Hundreds of warehouses, packed with millions of books, were located in these low-lying areas. When the floodwaters were diverted, these warehouses were drowned. The water destroyed countless books, textbooks, and historical documents. State media itself called it an unprecedented disaster for the book industry. A whole nation's library, gone. Washed away because of a calculated decision to protect the capital. The cost of saving Beijing wasn't just homes and businesses, it was knowledge itself. That's the harsh math of a sacrifice zone. And Zhuozhou wasn't some weird exception. This was the system doing exactly what it was designed to do. This terrifying reality brings us back to the huge ambition of the Sponge City. A project started because they wanted to avoid these exact kinds of impossible choices. The idea, first launched in 2015, was beautifully simple. Instead of fighting water with concrete walls and pipes, why not work with it? Why not redesign a city to act like a natural wetland? The program rolled out in over 80 cities. It was a new way of thinking about urban design. Streets were repaved with permeable materials that let water soak through. Green roofs covered in plants were put on new buildings to absorb rain before it even hit the ground. New parks weren't just for recreation. They were massive retention ponds, engineered to collect and hold stormwater before slowly letting it back into the environment or the city's water system. The goal was huge. By 2030, 80% of China's urban areas would be updated to absorb and reuse 70% of their rainwater. It was a vision of a harmonious, resilient future, a city that could drink the storm. And for a while, in many places, it worked. For moderate to heavy rain, the Sponge City infrastructure was pretty effective. It cut down on urban flooding, refilled local underground water, and made cities greener and nicer. It was praised as a global example for adapting to climate change. But the storm that hit Beijing in 2023 wasn't a moderate storm. The floods that swelled the Beijing River in 2024 weren't just heavy rain. These were black swan events, the kind of disasters that break all the rules. The 140-year storm was so far beyond what these systems were designed for that it overwhelmed them almost instantly. As one policy advisor at Greenpeace East Asia pointed out, China's sponge cities aren't immune to rapidly increasing rainfall. They can soften the blow, but they can't handle a catastrophe. A sponge can hold a bucket of water. It can't hold back the ocean. This creates a terrible problem. A city invests billions to create a permeable, absorbent landscape, which then gets completely saturated by days of extreme rain. The ground turns to mud, the retention ponds fill up, and then the main flood hits. The sponge, already full, has no capacity left. The runoff is just as bad, if not worse, than it would have been on regular concrete. The solution, faced with an overwhelming opponent, simply fails. And this shows a deeper, more philosophical fight going on across all of China. It's a war between the country's incredible engineering power and the terrifying new strength of a chaotic climate. China has this long history, a cultural memory, steeped in fighting floods. The 1931 Central China floods were one of the deadliest natural disasters ever, a national trauma that might have killed as many as 4 million people and shaped an entire generation. The 1998 Yangtze floods were another huge disaster, leading to a massive push for stronger dams and dikes. This history created a national mission: control the water. Tame the rivers. Make nature follow the state's will. It led to projects like the Three Gorges Dam, this concrete giant that literally slowed the Earth's rotation. It led to straightening and channeling countless rivers to get water to the sea faster. It's a philosophy of total control, of engineering as destiny. But the main idea behind all that is now broken. All this infrastructure, from the smallest permeable paver in a sponge city to the biggest megadam in the world, was designed using old data, based on ideas like a 100-year flood or a 1,000-year storm. But what does a once-in-a-century flood even mean when you have two of them in different parts of the country in the same year? What does a 140-year rainfall record mean when the climate that produced the previous 139 years of data doesn't exist anymore? The enemy has changed. The rules of the fight have been rewritten by atmospheric physics, and China's vast, expensive arsenal of flood defenses was built to fight a war that's already over. So much of this research comes from putting together expert opinions, official reports, and stories from people who were there. It's a huge job. If you like this level of detail, the best way to support what we do is to subscribe. It makes sure you don't miss our next investigation and lets us keep digging into these complicated global stories. It's a tiny click, but it really is that important. Please, just do it now. The failure of the sponge and how the old models got completely overwhelmed forces the government back to its oldest, most brutal strategy: planned sacrifice. It falls back on those 98 shuzhihongku, back to choosing who to save and who to flood. This isn't a flaw in the system. This is the system. And it creates a really unsettling social contract for a nation of 1.4 billion people. Do you live in a place that will be protected no matter what? Or do you live somewhere that will be sacrificed? The people of Zhuozhou now know their answer. But who's next? As sea levels rise and storms get stronger, the number of places that need protecting will increase, and the number of places available to absorb the damage will have to grow with it. The flooding in China isn't just a simple story about rising water. It's about three huge forces crashing together: the unstoppable power of a changing climate, the incredibly fast pace of Chinese urbanization that has paved over the natural world, and this deep, maybe arrogant belief that any problem can be solved with enough concrete, money, and control. What we're seeing is that belief failing in real time. The floods are just one symptom of a much deeper crisis, a crisis of limits. The limits of engineering when facing exponential change, the limits of a political system that puts a shiny new city over an established living city next door. The limits of control in a world that's spiraling out of control. The water will, for now, go down. The people of Hebei and Guangdong will start the long, painful process of rebuilding. The government will pour billions into reconstruction and promise to build bigger, stronger, better defenses. But the real problem isn't how high the dikes are or how permeable the pavement is. The problem is the sky. The problem is a planet that's completely changing how it moves water around. China built a sponge to soak up the rain, only to find it was facing a fire hose. The tragic lesson of Zhuozhou and Qingyuan is that when the water rises this high and this fast, someone always has to pay the price. The only question left is who will be next.